Well, we're out driving around in a bit of a rainstorm.
Oh, it's been like that all weekend.
It's been wet all weekend, but we're out at Moab, Utah for the car show, which is a pretty darn remarkable car show. That's actually next week's show. Mm-hmm. This week's show is about a movie that we worked on about 2 years ago. Yeah. A big Hollywood film, The Giver. And we provided, I think, about 56 seconds worth of footage. Or the studio, the Redmond studio, worked on about 56 seconds with a crew of 100 people and more intensive work. Every second of screen time is just so hard to come by. And such a major project for us. And you see it up on the screen and it's like, 2 seconds.
2 seconds, there it is, gone.
Seriously, but that's it. It's just, but that's what it is to work on a huge movie like this. Every second of screen time is so expensive and so precious. Mm-hmm. And never mind that driving around out here in Moab is awfully pretty too.
It's gorgeous.
Enjoying the car show. This is a great car show. So check that out. That'll be next week's show. This week's show, providing 56 seconds of footage for The Giver. So if you've watched any of the Toyman shows on our studio, Lab 6 Studios, then you know that we make motion picture soundtracks down there, among others screwing around. It's certainly a massive form of screwing around, but I would contend that all filmmaking is. This is our engineer, Bo Gorley. He's working here on a film called Romeo and Juliet. We just finished that up yesterday. Now, quite often we're sworn to extreme secrecy when working on a project, especially a big film like The Giver, which we had in studio about 2 years ago. The vast majority of the film was shot in South Africa. Some parts were shot in places like New York City and, in fact, here in Utah. And while they were here, we had to set up an Avid network. We strung fiber optic cables through the entire building and set up 3 editing stations in various rooms. This was all equipment that was traveling with them at the time. Now, we do have a big shooting stage there at Redmond Movies, and they were going to utilize that for building a mountain. We also have a camera department, and they were renting their cameras from us as well. And here, back in the recording studio, we were doing some voiceover recording. So let's look first here at the mountain set. It's built the same way that one would build a model railroad. I guess you could call this the benchwork. It's the framework that's going to support the mountain. And in this case, the mountain has to be strong enough for the actor to climb it, because that's what the shooting requires, a mountain for the actor to climb. This way you don't need to worry about the real weather outside. These are latex rock molds, same as you would use on a model railroad, except that they are 4 by 8 feet, but they were castings taken off actual rocks. And they're going to be filled, in this case, with expanding urethane foam instead of plaster. And you can see here that the final castings are just very thin, and in this case very flexible, so that they can be sort of wrapped around the wooden support, and then the expanding foam shot in from the back side to hold the various pieces together and to anchor it to the wooden framework. At that point, the excess foam has to be carved away with a butcher knife, leaving behind something that really does look like a rock face. Just as on a model railroad, the end result can be quite convincing. It looks just like rock because it's castings taken off of actual rock. The whole thing is then painted with latex house paint. It's a lighter color when it goes on, and it's rather glossy when you first paint it on there. But as it dries, it gets darker and turns flat. Various shades are sprayed on to give it a nice irregular color. At that point, the details can be added. In this case, cotton for snow and actual vegetation that was brought down from the mountains, which is all sort of glued in place, along with some loose rock pieces also collected up in the mountains to bring together something that looks rather convincingly like an actual mountain. The great irony here is you're the only people who will ever see this, because in order to match existing footage, it was found that this whole thing would have to be covered over with 2 feet of artificial snow. This happens a lot in motion pictures, that you work on something and then it gets altered or just flat thrown away. Here's the final scene in the movie with Breton Thwaites and the baby climbing on the mountain. 2 different shots, each on screen for about 2 seconds. Another set that had to be constructed was part of this cabin. This is a cabin up in the mountains, and it's going to be used in a wide shot, but Breton walks up to the cabin and sees a Christmas party going on through the window. Here's the wide shot as it appears in the movie, and in order to control the lighting inside the cabin and the weather outside the cabin, it was decided to build a set of the front wall of the cabin and the window, as well as the interior walls inside the cabin. Here's how that was done. The log walls were built out of styrofoam. Wooden templates were cut on a bandsaw, and then those templates set on either side of a block of foam, and then a hot nichrome wire pulled through the foam block to cut out the shape of a log wall. This requires having 2 people, one on each side of the block of styrofoam, pulling the wire through. At this point, the wall can be sanded with an orbital sander, and then wood grain and cracks in the log can be added with just a soldering iron by burning that into the styrofoam. The orbital sander is used to make the logs rather irregular. This way they look much more like an actual log. And when the paint is added and the wood grain is added, they look really quite convincing. Now, these are the interior walls. The exterior walls of the cabin are simply painted brown, just like they are on the real cabin, in order to match the other footage. The exterior walls are built out of much longer logs. They're made the exact same way with a really long nichrome wire. Now, the cabin also has a perfectly functional actual door, just like the one on the real cabin, and the rock work was done using more rock castings on styrofoam. Here again, the outside wall is simply painted brown to match the existing cabin. Here is what you see on screen, just this close-up of the door, and then the shot through the window where the party's going on. But as you can see, you can't see any of the interior walls or any of this detail, and the whole thing's on screen for less than 4 seconds. Now, an entire sequence of shots was done out in the parking lot. They ended up being on screen for over 50 seconds, so compared to the other stuff, this is pretty big time. What was needed here is the top of a mountain ridge, and so it was built the exact same way as the mountain inside, using urethane castings, in this case attached to big blocks of styrofoam, and then the whole thing buried in actual snow. As it was rather cold outside, didn't need to worry about the snow melting. The whole piece of business is shot in front of a green screen, and aerial footage of the Wasatch Mountains is going to be keyed in behind the artificial mountain ridge. This is the director, Philip Noyce, a giant of a man and an absolutely fabulous filmmaker, and a very energetic and fun person to be around. Now, between the takes, the cameras and, in fact, the actors could all go inside where it was warm so they wouldn't freeze to death out in the parking lot. The camera here is being controlled by a computer on something called a motion control rig, and that allows them to match the camera to the aerial footage that has already been shot up in the mountains. Now, this is Breton's stand-in. They use a stand-in for the focusing and alignment so that the actor doesn't have to freeze outside in the cold weather. And here's what the final is going to look like. You can see the composited shot on the right and the shot being taken out in the parking lot of the foreground mountain ridge on the left. There are several different shots in the film, some very wide shots like this one, and some that were taken much closer up, where you can actually see the expression on the actor's face. But they were all done right there in the parking lot on the fake snow ridge. So that's what it's like working on a mega movie like The Giver.
Right.
And I will say we've worked on a few mega movies there at Redmond, not the least of which was Skyfall. We've had some really, really massive, major movies come through there, and it's always a joy to get to work on 1 or 2 seconds.
Very educational,
worth of it.
really.
And then also, I've, over the history of the world, spent a certain amount of time sneaking on people's sets too. Indiana Jones was my favorite set to sneak onto because, boy, their craft services, the lunch that they provide is excellent.
Right.
And the shrimp creole that they provided for the people who were on the crew and the people who they didn't know really weren't on the crew that had just crashed their set.
They call that photo bombing now.
Yeah, it's photo bombing. Back then it was just stealing food. But I find it really fun to sneak on people's sets. But it's more enjoyable if you're actually supposed to be on the set, as we were in this particular case. Well, next week, of course, we're still here in Moab, this beautiful, beautiful Moab area for the Moab Car Show, and most importantly, the Moab Cruise.
Oh.
Because the cruise associated with the car show, it was really the best part. The car show is good. The cruise is probably, well, it's the best cruise I've ever been to.
Well, we were kind of in it, but I don't think they took me serious in this little Focus.
Well, a Focus in the cruise, but I'll tell you what, when you're cruising, it doesn't matter that much what you're in.
It's the
my
new baby. I don't
stuff
care what
around you.
Yeah, it's
you
like
know.
I'm showing off my new car.
And the thousands and thousands of people lining the street just to watch the hundreds of cars that are in the cruise drag racing each other and getting arrested by the police for drag racing each other. And it's old school cruising. It's 1968 cruise all over again, right down to the arrests.
That's right.
You know,
except the cops are much younger than the people.
Yeah, the cops are younger, but they're still writing you up for drag racing and muffler cutouts and all the same crazy stuff that they were writing people up for back then.
It was an era.
It's an amazing cruise.
They go home and talk about it.
So that's next week's show. So you definitely want to check that out. If you haven't been over to the channel to watch the amazing and fun movies that are over there, do get on over there. There's a blue button coming in down over in here in a few seconds, and if you click on that, it will subscribe you to the channel, which is important if you're not a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, said blue button just takes you to the channel where you can watch 135, 6, something like that movies now. And we'll subscribe you so that next week you will be notified that, in fact, the Moab Cruise is up and you can watch it. Well, we're not sure how you found this very informative film on filming on the internet, but we hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here again next week with the Moab Cruise. See ya. Bye-bye.